Hello, Colt here. I'm here to chat again about my experiences with treatment for stomach cancer. And with all of these videos, I'm starting off with a toast to myself with a bottle of Ardbeg Anoa, which, as folks might know, was something that I purchased for myself about a week after I was diagnosed. And it was purchased to congratulate myself for surviving this. And I'm glad to be able to share that because I am surviving. So I think the last time that I left off, I was just chatting about my initial experiences with chemo. Specifically, I was involved in a chemo regimen called FLOT, and it's a pretty harsh regimen. So I had my first administration of chemo in the early weeks, actually I think it was the first or second week of July 2019. And I believe my story left off with me getting strapped into the chair. Well, not strapped into the chair. I sat there of my own accord. But getting hooked up to all of those meds as my father was being rushed to the emergency room. And I was not getting any updates about him. And it was a really, really scary experience for me because the initial thought was that my father could have been having a stroke or a heart attack because he had lost his balance. He required a nurse to kind of stabilize him, and they weren't taking any chances. So that's where we're starting up again. I'm in the chair. I am surrounded by nurses, and the nurse who's hooking me up is wearing essentially a hazmat suit. Because the stuff that goes into you is poisonous, you don't want to get exposed to it. However, it's exactly what you need to try to combat this cancer. So, that's where we're starting up again. Chemo administration is not quick. It's not like when you go in and get a shot, like a flu vaccination or anything like that, where you get the shot in your arm and you're done. Specifically, I had a port in the left side of my chest, and all of those medications basically get pumped through that port. I don't have it anymore. I just have a scar at this point. I can't even really show it to you from here. But again, hazmat suits, all these warnings about how they have to dispose of this, all of that fun stuff, and it's going in my body. And I know that there are a lot of effects to it, and unfortunately, once they start that process, they can't stop. So it's not like I could say, hey, time out, I want to go check on my dad. That wasn't an option. So they basically tell me that they're going to try to provide me updates as possible, but they can't guarantee anything. And unfortunately, my father at that point is not responding to text messages or calls, so I have no idea what's going on, and nursing basically doesn't know what's going on either. So one of the fun first effects that you get from chemo, especially my understanding is the platinum-based chemos, is you get cold sensitivity. And back when I was getting treatment, they didn't have a lot of ways to combat this that they do now. Cold capping, cold mitts, stuff of that sort. So basically the story is that as chemo gets administered, towards the end of that administration, which for me was I think 6 hours or so in a chair after all of the blood work and everything is done, you start to get this experience where cold liquids will start to hurt your mouth. Touching cold things with your hands or having cold objects placed on you will actually get painful. And as you get through treatment further and further, it gets worse. It's cumulative, like a lot of effects of chemo. So I'm sitting in that chair, I'm worried about my father, I'm getting this poison pumped into my body to hopefully help kill this cancer. And I had orange juice and apple juice that I was drinking at the time. And I remember with maybe an hour or so left of the chemo session, I took a sip of that and my throat closed up and it started to hurt. So I knew that those side effects were building and starting up. So I had to stop drinking that. From that point forward, at least soon after chemo, about the only thing I could do was drink warm liquids or room temperature liquids. And as it progressed, it actually got to the point where I could pretty much only drink hot water. And when I say hot water, I mean pretty much uncomfortably hot water. So get through the first administration, get out of the chair. There's not a lot to tell about that first one because the effects hadn't really ramped up yet. But I get out of the chair, immediately go down to the emergency room, inquire about my father, find out that he's in one of the rooms in the emergency department, and go and check in on him. And thankfully, it was not a heart attack, it was not a stroke. He had pinched a nerve in his back that had caused him to stumble a bit, and again, it was just out of an abundance of caution that nursing had brought him to the emergency room to get checked out. But my father was in a lot of pain. He was initially in a wheelchair because he couldn't walk really steadily on his own. So as I'm getting out of chemo, kind of feeling gross, cold weather, thankfully wasn't an issue, but cold liquids, cold breezes kind of sucked. I am pushing my father through the hospital in a wheelchair as I'm feeling gross, and pushing him out to the car, picking up prescriptions for him, and getting him back home. So that was my first chemo session, kind of a shocker for me. And the thing about chemo too is they pump you full of steroids to begin with. They give you medications to help combat nausea, but really it's after a couple days, so a couple days after chemo that you start feeling gross, like really gross. And another thing too is after you get disconnected from basically the stuff that they have pumping into you in the chair, they give you this nice fanny pack that again pumps a fourth chemo drug into your body that you have to wear then for another 24 hours. So again, 24 hours, I'm stuck with this, basically tethered to this fanny pack with another poison getting pumped into me. And then after that's disconnected, they put another thing on you. It's a medical device called a Neulasta On Pro. And that basically, after another 24 hours, injects a medication into you that's designed to boost your white blood cell count. Because one of the biggest effects of chemo is that it destroys your immune system. It destroys any fast-growing cells. It does a lot of damage. But again, the whole hope is that it kills the cancer, which is the fastest growing stuff inside of your body. So you have to kind of live with this understanding that for a period of time while you're participating in chemo, a cold, the flu, anything like that could potentially be fatal if you don't get it checked out and don't get help medically immediately. So they always tell you if you get a fever of 100 degrees, you got to go into the emergency room, get checked out, because there's concern that there's going to be infection and that the infection is going to basically run rampant through your body and cause significant damage. Thankfully, I never got to that point, but like clockworks, a couple days after chemo, first I was feeling kind of okay, then I started feeling just kind of gross. Kills off the lining of your stomach. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about a stomach anymore, but kills off the lining of basically your entire digestive system. Makes you basically raw from where food goes in and all the way through where it comes out. So you get this nice combination of constipation, diarrhea, don't really know what to expect on any given day. I'm not going to sugarcoat this stuff. If you're watching, you're probably interested or involved in this community, so we're not going to be strangers about that stuff. But again, a couple days later, started feeling gross, felt gross for a number of days. But then it was really kind of interesting. One day I started to feel a bit better, and then I would say a full week after my first chemo session, I felt perfect. And when I say perfect, I don't mean I felt like I did the day that I went in for chemo. I mean all of the signs and symptoms that had kind of brought me to medical attention in the first place. So difficulty swallowing, heartburn, bloating, belching, all of that stuff was gone, 100%. I felt fantastic. I remember going out that next weekend with a couple of friends, and I had a burger, had a couple beers, and I just felt tremendous. And I started thinking like, I've turned a corner already after one round. And I remember telling my oncologist, like, hey, I feel great. I think that this is working. And he kind of looked at me like, yeah, sure it is, whatever. Like, probably just the steroids. You're probably, like, it's not going to work that fast. But over the course of that next week, I continued to feel really good even when I wasn't taking the steroids, because you really only take those as you're getting ready for that next round. So I remember going in for all of my blood work before round 2, and I talked to my oncologist, and he tells me, you know, maybe this is working like you think it is. And since you're feeling so well, maybe the side effects aren't going to be so bad. Like, maybe you're going to keep your hair. Now, this might be the time where I splice in some other footage and some other pictures, or if I'm feeling lazy, maybe I won't. Hopefully I'm not feeling lazy later. But I started to get really, really hopeful about that. So, sit through my second chair session. Again, cold sensitivity happens. I feel a little bit grosser earlier on throughout the session. And I start telling myself, though, like, I'm going to keep my hair. This isn't going to be as bad. And I go home, and like an hour later, my hair starts falling out in clumps. Just like, I remember running my hand through my hair and a chunk fell out, and I just looked down and I was like, well, I'm not going to just let nature take its course. I'm going to just shave this off. So I shaved my head, and then I noticed that my beautiful beard was falling out. So I had to get rid of that as well. So maybe progression pics, maybe not. You can take my word for it, though, and I will actually at least include some after pics throughout this. So that was round 2. Now, unfortunately, every single round, the side effects get worse, and they stick around longer, and they're cumulative. So you start feeling grosser for a longer period of time, and there's less of a recovery period before the next round. So I felt grosser longer, cold sensitivity was worse, nausea was worse, although I never vomited, at least through the first half of chemo. All the digestive effects were worse. I started getting pains in my midsection, like basically where I thought the tumor likely was. And one of the things that I told myself through chemo is that pain was the chemo actively killing the cancer. It was damaging the cancer, and that was causing the pain. It wasn't the cancer getting worse, it wasn't anything like that. And I kind of pictured my cancer as this beast in a cave growing stronger. And I knew that we had to attack it, we had to be proactive about it, we needed to take the fight to it, because if we didn't, it was going to keep getting bigger and keep getting stronger, and that was what was going to kill me. So I took all of the side effects of chemo in stride as much as you can. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like, oh, woe is me thinking, like, this sucks, because it sucks. Nobody goes through chemo and is like, hey, that was a lot of fun. And as I probably said before, either on camera or to other people going through this, chemotherapy is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. If my worst enemy was diagnosed with cancer, I would be right there with them, getting them through chemo, but I wouldn't wish somebody to have to go through chemo unless it was necessary. It's not a pleasant experience, and it keeps getting worse. And arguably the worst part about it is, unlike something like a surgery where you go in and you don't know what it's going to be like, and you just kind of have to live with the consequences of it, live with the after effects of it, you feel chemo every time getting worse. And every time it's that date that you know you have to go in for chemo, you know what you're getting yourself into. And you know it's going to be a little bit worse that day, but it's at least going to be as bad as it was last time. And that was absolutely the case. So I get through round 2, I go in for round 3, and they do the blood work, and the oncologist came and talked to me, and he said, Colt, your liver numbers are not in a healthy place. Your liver enzymes are elevated, you're actually experiencing liver damage already, and you're to a point where it's unsafe for you to continue chemo at this point, which devastated me. One of the things that you're worried about after you've convinced yourself that chemo is what you need to do is that they're going to tell you you can't continue chemo. Because at that point you're thinking, like, what is going to help save me now? What is going to kill this cancer now? So what they will often do is they'll give you a break. They'll give you another week to rest up, and during that week, I went online, I looked at all the options for like what are things that can help repair my liver, and I don't know if it helped or not, no idea whatsoever, but the American Cancer Society had an article about using milk thistle extract to help liver, and there were some studies published about specifically children with leukemia, and children with leukemia who used milk thistle were generally able to tolerate chemo better than those who did not. So I figured what did I have to lose? There was no evidence of toxicity or interaction effects with chemotherapy, so I went out and bought milk thistle supplement from my local Walgreens. And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, maybe it was placebo effect, maybe my body just got used to chemo, maybe my liver healed on its own because it's got that kind of miraculous ability to recover from a lot. As I take a sip. But after that week, my liver numbers were within, not like the great range, but they weren't in the danger zone anymore. Now, something else that happened during that time period is one of the real rocks in my life was another fairly recent cancer survivor. He was about a year further along than me, and I reached out to him after my chemo was paused, and I wanted to get his input, his reassurance, and he told me that he thought he was having a recurrence of his cancer. He was told that he had a bowel obstruction, and when it comes to cancer patients and cancer survivors, that's something that really scares us because often that is a sign of a malignancy in our bowels, and that usually signifies that there's been metastasis of our cancer. So I was pretty devastated there. I tried to be hopeful for him. I tried to, let him know that he needed to wait and see what the doctors said. He had been doing so well, he had been so healthy that even though odds may show one thing, we really have to hold out hope for these things. But really it kind of devastated me at the same time because, again, when you anchor your success to somebody else who you see as a survivor and then you see them struggle and you are concerned that you are watching them fall, it makes you think about yourself too, and it makes you really self-conscious about your progress, your prognosis, your chances, whatever it happens to be. Now, thankfully, his blockage ended up not being a malignancy. He required I think a laparoscopic procedure. They were able to clear out a blockage. It was related to scar tissue, which is also something very common for somebody who has gone through any sort of major surgery, which he had, and he remains healthy to this day, and I am very happy to watch his family grow. Of course, my dogs are going to start barking now because there's somebody outside. They're very rude about that, so my apologies there. Anyways, so round 3 happens. I am able to get through that, and again, things are a little bit worse this time as well. Now, one of the other issues is because I had been experiencing that liver toxicity and the elevated enzymes, my oncologist had basically met with the team, and they had decided that it was very unlikely that I would be able to tolerate a full course of chemo prior to my surgery. So things were still trending up a bit. They weren't getting into the danger zone, but the concern was I wouldn't make it through 6 or 8 rounds prior to surgery. So the decision was made that after round 3, we would send me off for an updated PET and CT scan and blood work and all that fun stuff. And depending upon how things looked, they would make a decision about whether I was eligible for surgery. So round 3 happens, a little bit sicker longer, able to work less, still not throwing up or anything like that, but just feeling kind of gross overall. And then that date comes for my PET and CT scan. And it was my second full one, where I had to sit for a long period of time in silence, contemplating my mortality, worried that, treatment hadn't been working. And I get through it, and I meet with my oncologist, and what you hope for when it comes to chemotherapy with stomach cancer is not that it's cured you, that rarely happens. Even with, you know, a very successful chemo, you're not really looking for a major shrinkage of a solid tumor. You're really looking to try to stem the spread of the cancer, and if there's been any micrometastases, so small groups of cells or single cells that are broken off and floated elsewhere and maybe attached elsewhere, that you're able to kill those small groups. But you don't really expect a major effect on the size of a solid tumor, especially a large size solid tumor. And that was not the case for me. So 3 rounds in, again, thinking back to the fact that I was told after round 1, when I said, I think that it's working, that it was a bit premature for that. 3 rounds in, I didn't have any measurable cancer on scans anymore. Thickening of my stomach was resolved. Nothing lit up on the PET scan anywhere. The tumor had basically shrunk to the point where, yeah, they could see that there was, you know, likely scar tissue there, but no sign of there actually being any cancerous tumor there. The ulcer was gone. There was nothing bleeding. I don't want to say it's a miracle or a miraculous response, but I will say that statistically speaking, less than 1/5 of people who undergo a full course of FLOT chemo have this sort of response. So it's remarkable that after 3 rounds, that is my response. Also, it's very rare for people to be able to maintain their weight throughout chemo. And again, if I'm not too lazy to put up before and after and progress pictures, I will at least describe this to you. I lost a significant amount of weight between rounds. So chemo made it difficult for me to eat, basically leached any of my sense of hunger from me. It made food taste gross. Again, I was unable to eat anything that was cold. But in those times when I was feeling good, I ate whatever I could. And I went from somebody who ate like a lot of lean protein, and I tried to really steer clear of fats and sugars, to I'm just gonna eat whatever I can to maintain my weight. So I was able to gain back all of my weight in between rounds, even though I could sometimes lose 15 or 20 pounds in like the week after chemo. I would somehow gain that all back, and I'm sure a lot of it was water weight as well. I definitely didn't look like I was in great shape towards the end of the first half of chemo, but I survived. And my surgery, and I discussed this with my surgeon, we decided on a total gastrectomy. My surgery was scheduled for September 25th, and as I'm recording this right now, it's September 16th. So I wanted to get this video on the books before that date because I want to do a separate video for my actual surgery and the recovery from that. But I will say that the day that I stepped into surgery, I had gone from 230 pounds at my diagnosis. I would say pretty solid, very strong. I yo-yoed a lot throughout that, but I somehow was able to go into my surgery at, I think, 236 or 238 pounds. So I was also one of the lucky ones who was able to not only not lose weight prior to my diagnosis, but also gain a bit of weight leading up to my surgery. Because as we're told, you're going to lose weight. You're going to lose significant weight through the surgery, and there's also the concern about what happens afterwards. So depending upon how things look after your surgery, you might get more chemo, you might not, you don't really know. But my concern was that chemo was going to be a lot rougher after surgery than it was before, because without a stomach, you have less ability to store food, smaller meals, and you're also recovering from a major surgery and major impact to your body, major trauma to your body. So I wanted to make sure that I had a little bit of extra cushion room, figuratively and literally speaking, when it comes to this, so that I wouldn't be in as rough a shape after surgery if I did have to go through chemo again. So what's the moral of the story? Chemo is awful. I hated it. I also, for those who I mentor, really try to emphasize how important it is to try to stick through it as best as possible. Now, FLOT chemo in the original samples, in the German samples, had an attrition of like 60%, meaning 60% of people were not able to make it through to the end of chemo. And I was really, really dedicated to finishing this off because, as I had told my oncologist from the beginning, I wanted the kitchen sink thrown at me. I wanted everything done to be able to ensure that I was not going to have this come back if we were able to successfully treat it in the first place. So I wanted to make sure that I was healthy and ready for that second half of the battle should I make it through surgery. And thankfully I did make it to surgery. Spoiler alert, as you've already heard, I've made it through surgery and I still don't have a stomach. I will never have a stomach 5 years now later. So I will not finish up, because there's going to be a few more parts to this. I will talk about my surgery the next time I record a video. That will likely be next week. And then I want to take you all through what the second half of chemo was like. I also am going to make some videos about what it's like to live without a stomach, the lifestyle changes I've had to make, the struggles I've gone through in trying to recover from all of that and to maintain my life and my health since then, what it's like to be a survivor of cancer, and specifically a long-term survivor of a cancer that unfortunately claims the lives of a number of people, and unfortunately way too many people who are diagnosed. And I might also do a live session where I answer some questions from not only people who are going through this, but also caregivers and maybe members of the general public who just have some curiosity about what it's like to go through chemo, go through surgery, lose a major organ, and survive long term. So if you have questions, start thinking about those. If you have questions for me that you want me to answer in a recorded video, certainly leave those in the comments and I'll make sure to read through those. I generally don't get a ton of comments, so I don't anticipate there being a ton, but please, if you have questions, please reach out. And if you're impacted by this cancer, again, a huge resource for me was Debbie's Dream Foundation. If you need help connecting, please reach out to me directly or go directly to Debbie's Dream Foundation. And again, they're a fantastic resource when it comes to surviving this cancer, treatment options, mentorship, and even just getting connected with a community. Because when it comes to this, oftentimes people are diagnosed by local oncologists. They don't have a lot of resources. They don't know other people who have survived this cancer. And having that network and having that expertise is just, it's an immense resource. And I cannot stress enough how important and how impactful it was to me. So I'm going to sign off for now. But again, cheers. Again, I'm hitting 5 years cancer-free as of less than a week from now. So I look forward to celebrating again then. And thank you for watching.